welcome. You are one of the unsung heroes whose work we'd like to celebrate here on this blog, and so I'd very much like to bring to the attention what you're doing. So could you tell us what PTSD Resolution is and what you do?
PTSD Resolution is a charity, and we started it about 3 years ago officially to provide counselling or treatment, and we can discuss those words later, for ex-servicemen and women who find themselves struggling with the effects of post-traumatic stress disorder. And we being my colleague and I, Piers Bishop, having both been trained by the Human Givens Institute in a certain form of therapy called the Human Givens approach to therapy, realized that within it there was a model of treatment of trauma that would benefit and fit all these people coming back from operational theatres who may or may not be traumatized. So we thought that 2 and 2 equals 4. Why don't we put the therapists who are trained like us in touch with the veterans who are struggling?
Okay, and this wonderfully successful method I'd like to talk about a little bit later, but PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, is rather a mouthful. Now I wonder if you could just explain to us what you understand this to be.
Yes, well, the phrase PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, is a very tightly defined clinical condition, defined by the official manual known as DSM-4, and because it's so tightly defined, it allows certain groups of people to claim that PTSD isn't much of a problem, because only a small percentage of people have got it. So we try and, although PTSD is in our title, we try and explain that we're talking about post-traumatic stress conditions. In other words, all the various symptoms that cause people to be distressed by their traumatic memories. Things like anger, depression, anxiety, resorting to alcohol or drugs.
Yeah, so could you give an example, for example, of how a life can cascade out of control, and maybe, that the symptoms are not obvious early on?
Yeah. Well, the military person, man or woman, of course is highly trained to deal with problems. They're trained to overcome difficulties. They're trained to get on with whatever is necessary. So, as a breed of person, when they come out of the military, they've still got this determination to get over their problems. So it makes them very reluctant to admit to themselves or anybody else that there's something wrong. After all, they are tough people, and they find it very difficult to understand why they are feeling, to quote many of them, that something is wrong. I mean, one of our ex-clients the other day said that he struggled for 20 years before he realised something was wrong, and in that time he went in and out of prison 5 times.
Terrible, isn't it? What a predicament. And
Yeah.
just because we're not educating ourselves and each other.
Well, so you on the first instance, you've got this breed of person who, for all the right reasons, is trying to be tough and strong.
Yeah.
And what they find very difficult to admit to themselves is that there is something wrong. And they find it difficult because they don't understand what is wrong. And when it is explained to them that actually what they are experiencing is entirely a natural process of their brains trying to deal with a traumatized memory that's stuck in the back of their brain from some event in the past, and that once the symptoms, or once the origins of that trauma can be reframed and reprocessed within their minds, then they realize that they can get help, and that they will be relieved, and that all those symptoms will fade away. But it's taking that step to seek help that is the problem. And if a person tries to suppress it and control it over and over again, eventually the mind-body system will crack and rebel, and will say, enough's enough, I must go and get drunk, or I must go and beat someone up, or I must go and commit a crime to fix my drug habit, or whatever.
Yeah, so really what you're saying is that sometimes these symptoms may not manifest until they're out of rehabilitation, out of the comfort zone of camaraderie, when out back into this world where you're just out of step with what's happening.
Yes, very often soldiers say, or servicemen say, my wife or my family or my friends, they just don't understand, because they've not been there. They don't understand. And they don't understand because, they think they don't understand because they believe that there's no one can quite understand and share the experiences that they've shared, which is high states of adrenaline-fueled reaction to danger, to this mechanism. And of course some of them inevitably have come from, shall we say, difficult backgrounds. They find in the armed forces a security and a way of life that is exactly what they've been missing in their earlier life. So they get this camaraderie, and even though they're asked to do incredibly difficult and dangerous things, that in itself creates a bond and a purpose and a motivation that, of course, up until then has been missing. And so when they are then transitioned back into civilian life, they find that there is a complete vacuum again. They're back into chaos. From the order of the military life, they're back into chaos, and they find that some of them find it very difficult to deal with.
And so understandable. Yeah, that's an interesting point that you make there. Now, Tony, we obviously need to do quite a lot in preparation for the troops coming back from the war over the next few years. And there are so many charities and organisations out there already. Can you explain why you felt the need to set up another organisation?
We would like to join forces with other people. We don't believe we're in opposition to anybody. We believe we're complementary to all those traditional processes. The problem is the traditional route is slow, inconvenient, because people have to go to them. If you go down the medical psychiatric route, you're going to be offered medication, which a lot of right-minded people would prefer not to. If you then find yourself being signposted to combat stress, which is the predominant mental health charity, you'll find you're in a waiting list. You may find that it takes ages to get an assessment. It may take ages to get treatment. You may or may not get treatment. You may be offered alternatives like group therapy and so on and so forth. So for lots of reasons, the present system is inadequate. It's inadequate in its effectiveness, and it's inadequate in its availability. And so we realize that we have a very elegant way of putting the sufferer in touch with the therapist. Because we have a network of 200 therapists scattered around the UK, all trained in the same way, all doing their normal day jobs, they can pick up a referral at any minute that we offer it, and the chances are that they will be within reach of wherever the sufferer is. And if they're not, we take steps to make that connection. So we are immediate, we are available and local, we are free because we're a charity, we are brief in our treatment, typically 1 to 6 sessions, and we're effective. We have outcome measures that show that we have an 83% success rate in our treatment.
Now that is amazing, and I wonder if you could tell us a little bit about this very novel, effective, elegant and unobtrusive way of working with trauma, Tony.
Well, like all therapy, it depends initially on the first connection and the rapport that is built between the client and the therapist. We use the Human Givens model of treatment, which is a very clearly defined process which is non-dogmatic, which allows us to deal with the whole person. And the whole person meaning that not just his mental and emotional state, but his social situation, his surrounding criteria, and his way of living and his lifestyle and so on. So our therapy will address the core issues of the trauma, but it will also address the ways in which the sufferer can begin to think about his life in a more positive and constructive way, and indeed go as far as helping him by signposting him to other social services.
And there's one more thing, isn't there, which I'd love you to just highlight, is the fact that the dealing with the trauma is non-invasive.
Yes.
This is very important.
It's very important. See, most people think, rather in an old-fashioned way, that if you talk about it, it'll get better. Well, actually, we now know, neurologically, scientifically based knowledge that we have, that if you talk about it and relive it, you're merely adding to your stock of traumatic memory, which only goes to make things worse. Now, what we have found is that through the treatment that we offer, we do not need to know the detail of the traumatic event. All we need to know is, if you like, a headline, basically roughly where it was when it was. And through the therapeutic process, the client, as long as the client knows that we know what they're talking about, he doesn't need to talk about it, because his own memory will be encouraged in the process that we use to go through the event quietly and in a state of great calm, so that it learns that it can release the emotional content of that memory. And so, much to people's surprise, they don't have to tell their story. And sometimes the soldier or the person is desperately keen to tell the story, in which case the therapist will say, well, if you want to, you can, but you don't have to. And once they understand that, then they say as much as they want, but they're allowed to say nothing. I mean, we've treated people who've said, I don't want to tell it, but I do know what it is.
And to good effect.
And to good effect, yeah. Because they will release the trauma, and miraculously they will be freed from that terrible burden.
And have their intelligence back online. Tony.
And their sleep.
And their sleep, yeah. Of course. Well, I wish you a lot of luck, and we'll also just post underneath this audio blog details for anybody who wants to donate to your charity, because of course none of this can be done without
money. Yeah,
without money.
The charity pays the therapist a normal daily rate, and we need funds in order to pay the therapist. And at the moment, the big fundraisers like Help for Heroes and so on, it may be interesting for your readers to know, they don't do mental health. Help for Heroes allocates some money to combat stress, so it is a complete bottleneck, a complete stranglehold And that's what people need to understand, that there are other ways out there and we need funding.
Thank you.